Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to another segment of Cold from Report Live. If you want to call it that, we're not live, it's recorded, but hey, we're going to get down to the get down today. And I have my man with me, Thomas Frank Carr. He's new to Cold from Report. Thomas, you want to give a little quick bio on yourself, who you are, and where you coming from?
Yeah, so I spent the last roughly decade covering Penn State football. I grew up just south of Jamestown, New York, in a small place you've never heard of called Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania. So you grew up, you were either a Steelers fan or you were a Bills fan. And for the first 20 years of my life, I was on the unlucky side of that coin, being a Bills fan. Little different now, so excited about everything that's been going on. But I've been down here in State College for the last graduated school, and I've lived here ever since.
So, welcome to the team. We're glad to have you and bring your knowledge. Today, we're going to be talking about the Bills cap space situation. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainties with the NFL right now with the cap space situation. We don't know if it's going to be 180, 185, 190, and obviously, it puts a lot of teams in flux to know how much they're over the cap or how much they're in debt at this point in time. Obviously, we do have a report that the cap will not go any lower than 180 million, which puts the Bills, I think, roughly $1 million in the red.
Yeah.
Not too bad, but we're gonna go over today that we find we can find some money for the Bills. We want to talk about free agents. We're talking about guys like J.J. Watt and Richard Sherman and these other players. We're gonna tell you where the Bills could find some dead weight, if you want to call it, and find some money to retain some of their own and actually bring some new guys in to help us get to hopefully 2021, 2022 Super Bowl run. So, what you do? Let's get started. Who's your first guy, Thomas?
So I want to start where I'm a little uncomfortable, and that's with John Brown. I've been seeing a lot of people, and we're all kind of using the same tools when it comes to like the cap space stuff, right? I've been seeing a lot of people talking about cap casualty and John Brown. And I just am not comfortable with the idea of taking weapons away from Josh Allen. I understand that Gabe Davis had a good rookie year, and I understand that John Brown was limited for most of the year with injuries, but we have not seen a full season of Josh Allen with his deep accuracy that he had last year and a healthy John Brown. I still want to see that. And I don't think, I think you can still get away with extending John Brown, because a lot of what we're seeing is like this is the last year of his deal, so it's either cut him or you keep him at his number. I think that there's some wiggle room to be had where if you get creative with an extension and you move some of his money to the future, you can keep John Brown in the fold, because again, I think you need to add weapons to this offense. I'm not in the mode of taking away weapons from Josh Allen, and I still want to see Diggs, Brown, Beasley, Gabe Davis, and I know there's a lot of talk about getting a tight end. I still think you need one more, and if you're starting to subtract, then you've got to add other weapons on top of that, and I just think that's tough to do this year.
Obviously, most fans are gonna say, "Hey, it's worth." I think it's an $8 million savings, pretty much, if rounded
Yeah.
up, if you release him. And I guess I go back and forth with the same reasoning you have here. Is it best to move him? Is it best not to move on from him? Do we trade him? And you're right. It's Gabe Davis. Is he ready to step into that spot? Because from what I saw from Gabe Davis last year, he had some really good moments as a rookie.
Yeah.
But for me, when he was called upon, it did not seem like he was ready for that spotlight as a number two receiver yet. And I don't think that one more year of development behind Stephon Diggs, behind Cole Beasley, and behind John Brown would hurt him. I just don't.
Yeah, and part of the way they used him as well is, if there's one thing that the receiving core lacked outside of Gabe Davis, it was size. And he provided that element, but they also, especially early in the season, they kind of used him like a tight end, where they would bring him in 4 wide receiver sets and they'd motion him across the field and they just crack block with him. And he was pretty good at that. I mean, if you're saying for a rookie receiver, not a full-time tight end. So if you take him out of that role and you add a tight end, and I'm not talking about Hunter Henry, because I think that that's going to be a little too rich for anybody this year. But if you go in, you get like a Pat Fryermuth, or you go in and get a Brevin Jordan in the draft, any of those guys, you've got me kind of on the hook that maybe I'd be okay with moving on from John Brown. But the idea of removing him, moving Gabe Davis to the true number 2 in his second year in the league, and counting on that, To me, that's what the Green Bay Packers have gotten in trouble with doing with Equanimeous St. Brown and with Marquez Valdes-Scantling is they're expecting these young guys that flash and that are mid-round picks to just suddenly be consistent all the time and to be these upper echelon guys. That's where you get into trouble, where you expect these guys to then just work out. You need to have options, because we've seen the best games that the Bills had was when, if Diggs is covered, there's somebody else open. And it doesn't have to be John Brown. It doesn't have to be Cole Beasley. It can be Gabe Davis. Like, if you need to go that deep on your roster, they had so many options. And with that passing attack, I think you need to maintain that level of weaponry around him.
I mean, we went from a love affair to John Brown in 2019, the guy who got over 1,000 yards, to now we need to make him a cap casualty. So obviously, we just already talked about the cap space situation and Buffalo needing to find some money here to either retain a Matt Milan or retain a Darrell Williams or retain some of their own if they would like, or to bring some new guys in to get them over that Kansas City chief hump, if we want to call it that. What do you think we should do with John Brown instead of his kind of is a restructure, maybe cutting the salary down from the cap down from 9, maybe extending out a year? What are you thinking there?
Well, it would be up to him to want to take a pay cut. Like, that would be the first one if you wanted to say, for the betterment of the team, if you wanted to take a pay cut. That's one thing. But I think if you were to give because he's only 30 years old, right? I think he's 30 or 31 years old. There's plenty of tread left on the tire when it comes to Gabe Davis. Or I'm sorry, to John Brown. If you want to give him a 2-year extension and you rework in the deal that his base salary is lowered this year and it gives you a little more flexible cap space, and then you put some of that money in 22 and 23 when we're all presuming this is all going back to normal and the cap will go up a little bit more, I think that's reasonable, and I think that's within the realm of possibility, that you don't have to get rid of everybody you're looking at. You can finagle some of the numbers and push money off into the future. Now, you don't want to do that too much, because then you become the Saints, and look where they are now, and they are they're in a terrible position.
Yeah, and I think, this is something I've kind of been banging the table for about, restructuring a few people. And a couple of names I brought up was like a Jerry Hughes, possibly a Mitch Morse, and just finding $4 to $5 million here, because I think that $4 to $5 million a stretch a lot further than it would in a normal cap year this season.
Yeah.
But I just feel that Buffalo's going to be in such a good cap situation heading forward that we won't end up like the Saints. We won't end up in that situation, because I don't think we're going to end up doing it for 5 to 6 straight years to try to remain competitive. I think Buffalo's on par for next year, minus a Josh Allen contract extension, we do think is probably going to come this offseason. They're slated to have around $104 million estimated cap space going into
pretty good. Yeah, and if you look at the major contracts that they have on the books, they're Tre'Davious White, they're Deion Dawkins, and they're Stephon Diggs, and all of those guys. I think even if you're reasonable about what you look at their average year for salary, Deion Dawkins is a top 15 tackle, like, paid. So I think that's a reasonable deal. They don't have any extravagant dead weight on their contracts or anywhere on their roster at the moment. So yeah, you're right. They're in a good position going forward. And that's, I guess, what the important thing to look at, right, is I think everyone's looking at this year. How do you create cap space right now? And you don't want to, cut your nose off to spite your face. You still want to know tomorrow's coming, and you want to make sure you have a good team around Josh Allen in 22 as well. And you don't want to give up a guy like John Brown if you don't have to. And I think that that's a reasonable thing. As you pointed out, they're in a good position going forward that you might be able to do some of that.
So I went into this conversation, convinced that we were going to remove John Brown and we were going to cut him and move on, or possibly trade him for a conditional 5th or 6th round pick, something of that sort, to move the money. I think, Thomas, you have convinced me. I think a restructure would be better for John Brown, and maybe if he's willing. And I do believe John Brown strikes me the type of guy that he may be willing to do that for comfort. I know a lot of players in multiple sports have talked about trying not to have to relocate during the middle of this pandemic, because it makes things twice as hard to do so. So I think John Brown, I think we both agree maybe a restructure, if he's willing, would be the best option here.
Yeah, and you make a good point too about moving people around. Do you want to get used to another receiver too? That's the other thing, is like, if you got to bring people in, that's tough now. And I know that that's going to happen here in free agency and all that stuff. But the major storyline last season was they couldn't get together to get any chemistry on the field. I don't think I want to remove John Brown, who has more chemistry with anybody but Cole Beasley on the roster. I said Isaiah McKenzie. Sorry, I got to remember Isaiah McKenzie.
And he's a free agent. So he may not be here. This is a guy who had, speaking of McKenzie, this is a guy who had a pretty solid season, and reason to believe that there's going to be a team that maybe overpays him a little bit, knowing that Buffalo's in a certain cap situation, going back to the Chris Hogan situation possibly with New England, where they outpriced Buffalo by $2 million on purpose because they just knew they didn't have the money. It's possible that could happen.
Yeah, and I think if there's one guy you're looking at that might happen, I think that's the one I think everyone's kind of resigned to, right? And you're not going to bring everybody back, and I think that might be one that everyone's like, okay, we all love Isaiah McKenzie, but we know it's coming.
Yeah, I love, like you say, Isaiah, he's one of my favorite players on the team, but it is a business, and I think the guy has earned his pay rate. I mean, this is a guy who was floating around the practice squad of Denver, on and off the roster, got picked up at Buffalo, came in, and it paid big dividends bringing him in. And he's played some good football, and he's earned his money. Hopefully he gets it too. So the next guy on my list I thought was a cap casualty was Quentin Jefferson. I had high hopes, as I know you had too, of Quentin Jefferson coming to Buffalo. It was one of the free agents that I was happy bringing in last year.
Yeah.
But to me, it just quite didn't work out. I don't know if it was scheme, if it's the rotation. But what I do know is he has an $8 million cap hit this year. And in a season like this with this cap drop, we can't afford that for a rotational player with little impact.
So I thought he was okay. I think everyone was expecting a little more from Quentin Jefferson as far as like being that versatile pass rushing guy and being in the rotation with Ed Oliver at that 3 technique position. He was good, and he was a part of that rotation. They you look at PFF and you look at ESPN and they look at the pass rushing metrics, and Buffalo got pressure on the quarterback at the highest rate in the league outside of the Steelers. So they were number 2 in the league by both ESPN and PFF, and he was a part of that. But there's no, like we've talked about, there's no dominant pass rusher on this team. And to me, if you cut Quentin Jefferson, that's the money you use to go get J.J. Watt. They have a similar skill set in terms of like a bigger bodied edge tackle hybrid. It's just J.J. Watt does it at a different level. Like he's up here. Quentin Jefferson is a good 3 technique with versatility. J.J. Watt is, a transcendent player. And if you can use that $8 million, throw a couple on top of that, wherever you get the restructured money, and you get J.J. Watt, that's a gigantic upgrade. That's the money that you're well spent on that defensive line, rather than, middling results from a Quentin Jefferson and a Vernon Butler and a Mario Addison, throwing them all in the soup together.
I got to agree with that. Yes, you're definitely going to reallocate the money that you lose Jefferson, probably to hopefully J.J. Watt. And if a J.J. Watt agrees to come to Buffalo, then I think, you're almost all but guaranteed to see Quentin Jefferson moved, and obviously Vernon Butler as well, to properly place Watt and actually properly pay him, because he's already stated he's looking to get fair market value. And we know what that means. That's probably north of $10 million a year.
Yeah, so that's interesting. What is the number you'd be comfortable with when it comes to paying a guy this year specifically in like a base salary if he's coming in as a free agent?
Well, considering that we've had the most expensive defensive line in NFL for the last 4 years, I guess I would say I'm comfortable with 12.
That's exactly the number I was thinking too. Like what's higher than 10 but lower than 15, and like 12 is perfect. Like if he was willing for $12 million this year and then whatever you want after that, like, yeah, let's go. Like I'll put that money down. I might even give you another 0.5, like 12.5. I'm good if you're happy. That's what I want right there.
Yeah, so I mean, 12 I'm comfortable with, and like I said, if you got to give him the 12, you already got 8 tied up in Jefferson, and I don't think any of us will lose any sleep moving on. And we have to realize we still have Star Latuliele coming back next season, and we can't get rid of him. But you also have Justin Zimmer that got into the mix this year. So Justin Zimmer coming in and playing actually particularly well, and Harrison Phillips regaining his confidence in his form all throughout the season as the season went on. I think that we can move on from Quentin Jefferson, and we won't lose an ounce of sleep on that one. So
the 2 that you're right, Justin Zimmer is a big one, and then what Harrison Phillips does and how he comes back from that ACL injury next year is going to be big, because at that defensive tackle position, they've they don't play like a true nose tackle, but you need a nose tackle type player to absorb blocks. They talked about it. Brandon Beane talked about that at the end of the season. And they don't have anybody that's played with any consistency and played particularly well against the run. Part of me thinks maybe a year off for Starr, maybe it healed his body a little bit. Maybe he comes back in a better position. I don't know, but there has to be an answer. And Justin Zimmer has provided a little bit of an answer there, but there really needs to be one at that defensive tackle position, regardless of whether you get Watt or Von Miller or whoever. Like, that nose tackle position has to be fixed.
Well, paging Ed Oliver, it's
time to go.
Year 3. Come on, but let's get the wheels turning here. So next on the list, Vernon Butler Jr. Speaking of defensive tackle and sticking with nose tackle, this is obviously a guy that we brought in that was a part of the Carolina connection. At the end of the day, it was a guy that they were comfortable with. They brought him up. I think they overpaid him a little bit to come in. Obviously, they were in a desperate situation, but it was essentially a 1-year deal that can get out of it with ease. What do you think of Vernon Butler Jr. here?
To me, he's the most no-brainer in this situation. If you have, they have to cut, so let's say that everything is the same, and you want to get the band back together, and you want to bring everybody back that you can this year. You still, as we talked about, you're $1 million over the cap, and this is another thing that people aren't considering at the moment, is you need to have room to sign your rookie class. And I think it's going to be about $6 million, what you need for the rookie class to sign. And that's if they keep all the picks where they are. Like, if they trade up or trade down, that changes. But you need to have $6 million on hand as well to pay your rookie class. So if you're looking at like the Pittsburgh Steelers, like $30 million over, add $6 million because they need to sign. You need your rookies, and that's just with the Bills. Like, I don't even know what the Steelers their number is, and you need that money. And I think Vernon Butler is a place where if you're going to make a cut, he didn't make an impression on the team really at all this year. And it was structured in a way you could get out of it, right? So now it's time to move on and find a better answer at that defensive tackle position.
Yeah, I don't think we have to spend too much time on Vernon Butler. I think that we know the writing's on the wall. This was a guy who I had high hopes for because he kind of came on in Carolina last year where he was labeled a bust. He probably had his best season as a pro. So you were thinking that maybe he would come back to Buffalo and, gain his form, come back into the system he knows, and he really did. And at 6'4", 330 pounds, he, like you say, he didn't make an impression, and he didn't do very well. So I think at $6.8 million, yeah,
not every lottery ticket hits, right?
Right, not everything hits. And like you said, once again, Starr's returning. So moving on, this is an interesting case here, and I know you really wanted to talk about this guy tonight, and Jerry Hughes.
Yeah.
There's a fanfare and a fan love for Jerry Hughes like no other here in Buffalo. But I'm a guy, I'm more with, you have to produce for me. What have you done for me lately? And I have not seen Jerry Hughes put in the work that I would like to see for the $10 million extension that they gave him. But the fans love him, and people can make it a point to cut Mario Addison, but we need to keep Jerry Hughes for a reason when the production is pretty much the same. So what do you got on Jerry? What are you thinking here?
So I disagree a little bit there. The sack totals obviously have not been there. But when it comes to producing pressure and getting after the quarterback, he was amongst the best he was the best on the team. He's been in the top 10, over the last couple of years when it comes to the ability to get pressure on the quarterback. It's just converting that into sacks. The Bills just in I don't know if it's luck. I don't know if it's a technique thing, but last year they got a lot of pressure and just never got sacks. Like, they just couldn't bring the quarterback down. Think about the AFC Championship game where they're chasing Patrick Mahomes all over the field. They're chasing Kyler Murray all over the field. They're getting there. They just can't bring the guy down. Right. And I think that that's a part of the story there. And Jerry Hughes is productive. Is he a top 5 pass rusher in the NFL as far as, franchise guys? Not anymore. I think he was a couple years ago, but he is still valuable to me. I think if you get rid of that piece, that's the domino that makes it all fall, because then you don't really have anybody that's consistent. There's nobody on this front that's consistent right now, because AJ Epinesa was a rotational guy last year, got a little banged up, didn't really have, play a whole lot early in the season. So you have flashes of what he can do. you don't want to pull out those important pieces until you know you've got something else there to replace it. He's another guy that he's 33. So that's the difference between him and John Brown. But again, he's on the last year of his deal. If you take some of that money, and this is where you got to get creative, because you got to look at the big numbers. You got to move the big pieces. If you can move some of that money next year, and if you're willing to take that hit, if it doesn't work out, and he's 34 and you're ready to move on, I'd rather take a $6 million dead cap hit next year and, have that room this year to operate, because, we don't know what's going to be next year, but it's definitely going to be better than this.
And you use the word creative, and that's exactly the word that Brandon being used as far as describing what the Bills had to do going to this offseason, with finding ways to find money, retain their own, and possibly bring some guys in. He said no splash, but I don't quite believe him on that yet. But,
yeah, and then the first thing is, J.J. Watt, we'll talk to you. Yeah, the splash. The other thing that I think is interesting about the situation when it comes to Jerry Hughes is the amount of money that you're going to have to tie up in that if you do give him an extension, because the idea that you're going to put more years and more money on a guy that's 35, and you're right, as far as his ability to produce, he's declined a little bit. So with that comes a little bit of risk.
Well, I mean, even with the risk, so is this a candidate where we're looking for possible restructure, or are you looking to possibly extend out 1 year? Because for me, I would like to retain Jerry. He is a leader in the locker room. So if you do have to make that choice between Jerry and Mario Addison to free up some money, possibly maybe we extend Jerry 1 year, cut this cap hit down for this season down to $5 million. Next year, maybe it's 7-8 million with very limited hit. But if you do choose to move on, it is 1.5, close to 2 million dead cap this year, 7 in savings. It's hard for me to make that call.
Yeah, I'd rather, again, when it comes to this team, I'd rather keep as much of this team together as possible, because they're set up right now, as you've pointed, for the future with a lot of possibilities. And I don't think you want to limit those possibilities for short-term answers this year. And that's why, I'm looking at these numbers, and if I can extend John Brown and Jerry Hughes, I would do that. And, however you want to get creative with the money there, I think you take that money and you just defer to the future, because everything you were doing, you were expecting the cap to be different this year. So these aren't albatross contracts. You just need to get around it a little bit. And I think that is one way that you could do that.
All right. Well, I think for me, for Jerry, I think I would have to extend out a year to bring him back. But because this is the most expensive D-line, and I actually absolutely hate this rotational thing, I would have to be a hard choice for me, for Brandon Bean, between am I keeping Jerry Hughes or I'm keeping the guy I've been comfortable with for most of my time in Carolina, Mario Addison. But to me, one of these guys has to go. I don't think you can have $20 million tied up in both of these guys, because essentially they're the same player.
Yeah, right. They're both, I would say between the two, Jerry Hughes has been more productive than Mario Addison. Mario Addison is a good rotational veteran. He's a guy who came in with tough physical run defense. Those are all the things on his scouting report. At no point is pass rushing prowess at the top. And that was kind of my problem when I saw that addition last year. Now with AJ Epinesa coming in the draft, that makes a little more sense. But when it comes to the pure production on the field, you were adding veteran tough guys. And I don't want to disparage that idea, but you weren't adding speed, strength, athleticism. You were adding tenacity. And you had that already. You had all the tenacity. Now you need to add talent. And that's kind of if we get into the cornerback discussion, my thing is they had got a lot of smart, tenacious guys. They need to have some corners that have some talent.
Yeah. Well, as in using the words of my guy James Mallory, he always says the Bills need to find that pop player. You got good players, but you need that pop player, and that's what they're missing. And I have to agree, and I think that's why everybody's so high on this J.J. Watt train. Hey, we need to get this guy. If you don't get him, then Yannick Ngakoue, we need to get somebody. Von Miller, if he's not going to be retained, but you need to get one of these guys that, as I like to call him, is a professional pass rusher.
Yeah, however you cut that cake, you need to get a piece.
Right. So, all right, Mario Addison, what do you think? Do you think that we restructure, we let go? What do you think we should do there?
So when Brandon Beane said that if he had known what was coming this year, maybe we would have done different things in free agency last year. I think Vernon Butler and Mario Addison kind of fall into that category of you give a little less money to Mario Addison with that 3-year deal for $30 million. That was a little rich for a guy that was coming in, again, as a complimentary rotational sort of guy. I'd be fine as long as you're replacing him with a more talented pass rusher, a guy that gets after the quarterback. Like, it's not that you're taking a step back, but you're using that money to go invest in something that will help your defensive line actually get home to the quarterback. I don't think there's any love lost. I don't think that there's too much when it comes to that with Mario Addison.
I think with the Mario Addison's last year, I thought that was sort of a desperation signing again as well. Obviously most people don't know the scenario what happened with Shaq Lawson. And a lot of people think that the Bills didn't offer maybe fair market value, but the Bills did offer Shaq Lawson the same exact deal that they offered Mario Addison, which is funny because their deals are identical for Miami and Buffalo. Shaq Lawson turned down the deal because I think he preferred to live in Miami than Buffalo, and the state income tax was less in Florida. So he chose the Dolphins, and I think that was like, oh, well, we gotta get a pass rusher. We gotta get another one. And I think once again it was a comfort signing. I think AJ Klein, Vernon Butler, Mario Addison, and Josh Norman were all comfort signings. Like we know these guys. We're gonna bring them in.
And the COVID thing too was a major thing when it comes to all those signings. Is they couldn't get free agents in the room to actually talk to them and kind of get a feel for who they were. They had to go with who they knew last year because you couldn't get anyone in the building. You couldn't travel. You couldn't do dinners out. You couldn't get to know their wives or any of those things. The traditional wine and dine of even draft picks, you couldn't do any of those stuff. Everything's over Zoom. So if you want to make sure that you're getting a guy that you know what you're getting, it does make sense, kind of extends out that Carolina Panther connection a little longer. At what point are we done, by the way, with the number of guys that have been drafted by Brandon Beane in Carolina? When does that end and we go to the next general manager? Because when that happens, then it's over. Like there are no more Panthers coming to Buffalo.
Was Curtis Samuel drafted by these guys?
I don't know.
But if he was, I'll take just one more.
Just one more. Just Curtis Samuel.
Just one more. Just Curtis Samuel. And then we can be done with it. But not, Mario Addison, like I said, for me, it has to come down to who do you like more. If you're comfortable with Addison over Hughes, I have to agree with you. I do believe Hughes is the better player. But if you're comfortable with one and you got to get one, you got to pick one or the other. I just don't think you can have both. You can't have your cake and eat it too this year because of the cap space. I think you have to see what you have to have in Epinesa. This year he needs to play more snaps. You can keep him in the rotation if you like, but I would love to see him starting on one side of the field this year. And if he got it, if he has it, he has it. If he doesn't, then guess what? You need to be spinning the wheels again and finding somebody. But I just believe you got to figure it out.
The story with AJ Epinesa, I think, is super interesting. So, Penn State, I saw him in college, and as a sophomore, unbelievable. Like, he was a terror. He was getting around tackles. He had the edge bend, everything that you love in an edge rusher. But he was a rotational guy. And Iowa did that thing that I hate. And they said, to play in our system, you've got to be 280. You've got to stop the run first. So they took his best skill and they added 20 pounds. So he's playing at 280, 285 his junior year, and he was not effective. And I give Brandon Beane a lot of credit to go, well, I saw it happen before he got, a little overweight for his frame. And they asked him, and he said at the end of the year, they asked him to come in to lose weight. And he came in a completely different player. But as Brandon Beane said at the end of the season, maybe he lost a little too much weight. Maybe he lost a little too much of that strength that he needs at the top of his rush. I'm very high in what AJ Epinesa can do once he gets all of that settled and he has another year in the league. I think that he was a very good pick. And I do think he's going to be an answer. But you're right. You have to see it first. You can't just assume that. Because if you do that and it doesn't happen, you've got a 34-year-old or 33-year-old Jerry Hughes, and then a bunch of guys like Darrell Johnson, who I think is nice as a complimentary player, but you've got nothing else.
Right. All right. I mean, and like I said, you don't want to be waiting on these guys and see if they have it, and then they don't have it. Now you have these older guys, and then the wheels just fall off because we know
Yeah.
in the NFL that's what happens. One season you see them, and they're like, okay, they can still play. Then the next season, boom, the wheels have just completely just fell off the bus, and they're no longer the same, and they're no longer effective. And mid-season, you're looking for answers, and you're scratching your head. Next thing you know,
Yeah.
they're deactivated, as an example of Trent Murphy, for half the season, and you're paying him like $9 million for the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, that's a great Epinesa story. I didn't know that. See, I thought he came into Iowa, and I thought he was just that size the entire time. That's why when the Bills said, "Hey, you need to cut this weight," and they didn't play him more until he did cut the weight. I didn't know that. It
No,
makes
he
a
was
lot
a
of sense.
pure speed rusher. He was like 260, 257, and just was whipping on tackles. Nobody could get to him at the edge in college. And in the Big Ten, there's a lot of good tackles.
There was one play that kind of highlighted that. I don't want to get too far off topic. This year, they were playing. I forgot if it was the Chiefs or the Dolphins. Somebody they were playing, and he dropped back in coverage and like went left or right quick around the tight end. I'm like, oh, this guy is he's nifty. Boy,
Got some juice.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well now this makes a little sense. So I'm happy you put that in perspective. I did not know that. Now I have to go back and watch some film on AJ Vanessa sophomore year.
Yeah.
So the last guy is combined with, well, the last thing we're going to talk about is two guys kind of combined in one, because you want to talk about positional value here. And
Yeah.
John Feliciano.
Yeah, and Darrell Williams. And to me, I know that. So I have a coworker who is born and raised Buffalonian. He's a Bills fan, and he always tells me, like, I love those guys that if you hit the quarterback, they come in, they smear you, right? And he, Jim Kelly and all those guys and the offensive linemen that would come and, like, if you touch Jim Kelly, they get into a fight, right? And he's like, I love that. And I said, you know what I love? Guys that don't let the quarterback get hit in the first place. And, Feliciano, he's another one of those glue guys. He's a character guy. He brings that sandpaper to the offensive line, but he was not a good pass blocker. He just was not. And Josh Allen made up for a lot of that by being mobile in the pocket and being able to escape pressure. But if you're talking about the two, and they're at all comparable, right tackle. I mean, how long have the Bills been looking for a right tackle? How long have they been looking for bookends like they have right now with Darrell Williams and they have with Deion Dawkins? If you can get a deal done with Darrell Williams, do it. Should have done it like 6 months ago. Like, the minute that it looked like he was going to work out a tackle, and remember, he beat out Cody Ford for that position. Like, he took that from the guy they wanted that position to work out for. And he never looked back. And he was one of the best right tackles in football last year and had a career resurgence. Sign this guy. Like, if there's money to give to somebody this offseason to re-sign, if you can make it work, it's got to be Darrell Williams, because the bookends are so important. And that's the position on the inside. If you want to get better at running the football, Darrell Williams was a good run blocking right tackle. Get a guard. You're gonna fix the interior of the offensive line if you can upgrade, I think, one position. Because truthfully, I think Cody Ford, Brandon Beane made it clear he's coming back next year and he's going to be given every opportunity to start at left guard. You got Dawkins and Morse; those guys are set. Get your bookend, and then you've got to fix one position. Don't open up the whole right side again to a gigantic question mark if you don't have to.
As much as I love John Feliciano's attitude, I have to agree with you with the pass blocking. He brought a lot of energy. I love the fact that he brought a lot of versatility to this offensive line. If somebody went down, he can slide to center, he can slide to left guard, he can slide to right guard. I love that versatility, and God knows we need to use it at times over the past 2 seasons, especially with Morris having the concussion concerns. But reality is we can't pay for everybody to be that way. We can't pay for that at this point in time. So the only way I can agree with keeping a John Feliciano is literally if you're going to choose to move on from Mitch Morrison, you're going to slide Feliciano in the center to save some money. And I'm not asking for that, but that's the only way. Other than that, I think that there's going to be greener pastures for John Feliciano. What I mean by greener pastures, not necessarily winning, but greener in money.
Yeah, he'll have enough green around him that it'll look green.
Right. So I'm with you. We've been looking for right tackle. I mean, God knows we went through Jordan Mills for like 4 years.
Yeah. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to that because again, you're building the offense around the quarterback, and between the two, the most valuable pass protection is the tackle position. And if you're serious about building around your franchise quarterback, you've got to keep your tackle if it's possible. And I understand like Darrell Williams might want too much money, and you can't pay both your tackles $10+ million, especially right now. So if that's not an option, and you want to work on bringing Feliciano back on some sort of deal, I think you can do better at that position. To me, that's the big thing is I think you can do better at that position, especially if you're leaving the left guard at such a question mark with Cody Ford. One of those guard positions is going to be filled most likely with Cody Ford. Like I think Brandon Beane is going to give that opportunity to Cody Ford. They believe in the guy. So you're filling one of those to me with a question mark. If you can upgrade the other, do it. But make sure that if it's not in lieu of your right tackle.
And I agree with you. You know, I just think that Cody Ford's penciled in. It seemed like he left no open door to say, hey, this guy has to compete. It didn't seem like it was a competition. What we'll see in camp, it was, hey, Cody Ford's the left guard. We're going to figure out the other two spots on the other side. Until then, we'll let you know. I think another guy is Ike Bodager. You know,
yeah.
He's going to be a very cheap, inexpensive option, maybe an option you have to rely on. But let me ask you this question. If you can't get a deal done for Darrell Williams, what are you still letting John Feliciano go, or you say, okay, well, I don't want to leave two holes on this side?
I don't want to think about the future, honestly. Like I don't think John Feliciano was that good last year. Like that's the problem is what you're saying then is we're going to give money, extra cap space, and we're going to invest in a guy that didn't perform at a top 15 level at his position. And to me, that's as hard as anything when it comes to allocating that money in the wrong way. Like you're then valuing things that aren't on-field production, and just the numbers, the metrics, the pressure rate, the number of pressures he gave up. Like again, not a lot of them ended up in sacks, but a lot of that had to do with Josh Allen. Was that you have a mobile quarterback who performed well under pressure in the regular season. Don't allow that to skew your judgment of the job done on the offensive line.
Yeah. Hey, we'll see. We're going to see what happens. It's going to be a lineman in this draft. There's going to be a lineman that's going to be pushed back. I know there's going to be a lot of tackles in this draft that are going to be kicking in the guard because they are not going to be play tackle at the NFL level, which should give you a little bit extra pass protection. And you should be able to find some of those guys in the mid rounds. But I'm with you. I really want Darrell Williams back. What do you think the cap number for Darrell Williams is? What do you think is a fair contract for a market value?
The problem is, like, I think he played well enough that you're talking, again, $12 million. 12 is the number tonight, I guess. So it's just $12 million. Everyone's getting $12 million. Hopefully you and me get $12 million next year as well. But, I can't play right tackle, so I can't guarantee that. But yeah, I don't know, 8 to 13, but it's going to depend on who's interested in him and who has cap space. That's the crazy thing is we don't know what the spending's going to be like this year for any team, because the Bills are actually one of the teams that are kind of in the middle of pack in the amount of cap space, and they're $1 million on over. Like,
right.
Who has money? The Jets, the Jaguars, the Patriots, and a couple other teams have money. Everybody else is in the same exact position or worse. Like, it's actually a credit to Brandon Beane that they're only $1 million over the cap right now. And that, there might be more cap space coming. It might be 188, 185, somewhere in there. So they might even have a little more room to play with. But for real, like, I don't know who's going to be spending money. I did an article for the site about available running backs and guys that might fit in the position. Kenyon Drake apparently has a market value, according to some spots online, for $8 million. Who has $8 million to give to a running back this offseason? Are you kidding me? Like, great. Like, I'm sure he performed at that level, but who's got $8 million? I don't know what the numbers are going to look like this offseason.
No, I think it's going to be a mystery. I mean, obviously, I know a lot of analysts and a lot of league personnel are hoping and praying that new TV deal kicks in before the salary cap is set, so it could be somewhat normal. Because now it's going to be a lot of good players. I don't think we've had a salary cap offseason like this except since the lockout that year. Remember the lockout we had? And I mean, teams were shredding salary cap everywhere. I believe like the Cowboys and Redskins, if I remember, were like 40, 50 million over.
You remember what they did is because the year before there was technically no cap because there was no collective bargaining agreement. So the Cowboys signed everyone like they were the Yankees. And then the next year when there was a cap, it was like, oh, look at the consequences of our actions. Oh, no. So then they had to cut everybody.
Is that when the Redskins signed like Deion, Bruce? They signed the whole retirement home that year.
Oh, I was talking about the last cap, the last lockout in like 2011, I think it was. That was when Aaron Rodgers, I think, was coming off his rookie deal. So that was when they had the draft and there was no CBA and everybody was locked out, and they had like the one day that they all came back for a collective bargaining agreement and missed the whole preseason, and like week 1 was the first time that there was football. And that was like when the year before the Cowboys just signed, like Marion Barber got like $8 million, and like they signed all of these offensive linemen and all these defensive linemen. And then the next year they were just screwed.
I do remember that. But, I remember they did that before with the other lockout. But that's when Daniel Snyder was just becoming an owner, and he signed like Bruce Smith, Deion Sanders. All these guys were like 35 plus.
Yeah.
And he just blew the money. And I think that's when the league had to put like some type of stipend into the salary cap. It was like, hey, you could take half of your losses and put it to next season or something like that.
Of course. They Jerry Jones rule. If you screw up too badly, we'll make sure that it's okay. That's awesome.
Right. Jerry's world, man. No, and I guess the last person we'll touch on, because I know a lot of people, Matt Milan, are you in or you out for bringing him back?
I mean, I'd love to have him. He's one of the best coverage linebackers in the NFL. I think everyone is aware of that, but the injury history is apparent. I mean, if it's not a hamstring, it's a pec. If it's not a pec, it's an ankle. And I believe he's a great linebacker. But again, if we're talking about him getting $12 to $13 million and at that position, I just don't know that you can do that this year. And I'm okay with the idea of you're going to build around your quarterback, so you choose the right tackle over the outside linebacker. And that's really what it is to me. It's a value judgment, again, on positional value of off-ball linebackers get beat up in every scheme no matter how good you are right now. Linebacker is the hardest position to play in football because every Shanahan-style scheme puts you in a blender on every play, and you don't know what you're reading at any point, whether it's a jet sweep, whether it's a inside zone, whether it's a counter. You don't know what you're looking at half the time. And, it's hard to play that position. He plays it well, but, I'd rather go to the draft to find his replacement, a young, good coverage linebacker to replace him, instead of paying a lot of money to a position where you're going to get good but not great results, I think.
Right. Jabril Cox, anybody just saying that's nice.
Oh, that's my guy. Yes, that's my guy.
That's the guy I want, But, as much as I love Matt Milano, 13 million. I mean, to me, my number for him is 8 million. And I know 8 million, it's not, he's not accepting 8 million here or anywhere. Yeah. I think this guy's definitely going to get at least 11 on the market. I don't think he'll hit the 13 that the people think he is, but I think he'll get a 11. And I think 11 is solid. Mm-hmm. When you look at it over 4 years, that's $44 million. But I feel like here in Buffalo, we can replace him with this draft class at linebacker, because I do feel like this is a very athletic linebacker class. But hell, we see every year now how many teams are drafting these strong safeties from college and just moving to linebacker. I think we can replace him with a scheme fit too. Change the scheme just a little bit. Maybe bring in a Saran Neal into the box a little bit more, like we were doing, I think, the first couple of weeks of last year. I think we were down a linebacker in the first couple of weeks of last season, if I'm not mistaken. And we were using Saran Neal as a big nickel. I think we could do things like that to replace Matt Milano's production. But I just don't see the value there for $11 million. I have to agree with you. I'm going to choose Darrell Williams over Matt Milano. And if I can't get Darrell Williams back, then I'm sorry. I'll probably still run the risk of losing Matt Milano, because I'm going to negotiate with Darrell Williams till the wheels fall off.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's that. And I think that's what you're hearing when it comes to what Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have talked about when it comes to, we can't sign everybody. We can't bring everybody back. And every time they talk about Matt Milano, they said, he's earned the right to test free agency, and we're going to let him do that. And, a lot of respect on both sides. So the writing is definitely on the wall of like, if you don't accept the contract we have, we're happy to let you leave and go find a better place for you to play. And, I respect that. I think that from both sides, that's incredibly fair because Milano is a really good player, but they just, from a value standpoint and from a standpoint of this particular year, it just is not going to work.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, Thomas, man, I've had a great time. We got to do this again. I mean, we've wrote down the salary cap, and I'm going to recap what you said here because I believe that John Brown, we're looking for hopefully a restructure.
Yep.
Quentin Jefferson, he's probably gone. Vernon Butler, following Quentin Jefferson out the door.
Yep.
John Feliciano struggling on pass blocking. Don't see the value there. He's gone. Matt Milano at the right price, but we're going for Darrell Williams because we definitely need Darrell Williams back. And Jerry Hughes, you have to choose between Hughes and Addison. You're choosing Jerry Hughes.
Yeah, and J.J. Watt. And bringing in JJ and bringing in JJ Watt, like that's part of this. Is you're going to get one free agent. It's going to be one of the best pass rushers of this decade.
Hey, great show. If you guys are not following Thomas, don't know where they can find you at, man. Guess what stuff.
At Thomas Frank Carr on Twitter. I chose the most complicated handle because it's super long.
It's unforgettable. And if you guys are not, been to the www.coldreport.com, Thomas is putting out some nice, great articles. He put a very in-depth article of why J.J. Watt fits in Buffalo. So make sure you go check that out. He got the running back article out. He got more things coming. We glad to have him part of the team, and we'll come back and do this again. So guys, as always, thanks for joining us. This is the Cold Front Report. We'll catch you later. Crazy cap cuts coming. We'll see.
Parents swimming on the beach, hey.